You might be dead.
Just stop dying.
Yeah.
No, not yet. Don't you doubt me. Don't you doubt me. I'm the fastest man alive. Faster than this chump. that was perfectly timed. If you clicked on this video, there's at least an 84.282% chance you already played Team Fortress 2. How would you define a bad weapon? Well, I can't exactly listen to your response actively, so I asked a friend of mine the same question. So, you play TF2 much like I do, yes? You've been in it for a while?
Yeah, I've been playing for a long time. I got around like 2K hours on it now.
Right.
And,
so,
yeah.
What would you, sorry, let me rephrase. How would you define a weapon as a bad weapon?
I would say that a bad weapon defines as something that has like no use to it. For an example, the sun on the stick. The only way that you can actually like do well with the sun on the stick if there's like a pyro on your team. But if there's like no pyros on the team, it does less damage than a normal bat. And the only advantage to the sun on the stick, if there's like no pyros, is that you get fire resistance, which is pretty good, but all in all, I think it's a pretty bad weapon. The man melter, yes, it does extinguish people, but you can do that regardless with like your flamethrower, and I feel like that the man melter is trash, which is also defined as a bad weapon.
Okay, well, my next question was going to be if you could give an example of what you consider bad, but you did answer that. So I do only have one more question for you. Is your mother seeing anyone? Now, I define a bad weapon as any weapon that is incapable of being used effectively, regardless of effort or skill level. Now, you may or may not agree with me, but the way I see it, if a weapon is good enough to where a player can be a useful member of the team with it, it's not a bad weapon. If we consider this logic, there aren't really many bad weapons. One I would consider actually bad is the Thompson. I have more than 3,500 hours on this game, and in all that time I have seen a number of Thompson engineers. At best, they're mediocre. Certainly no better than the average engineer with a stock shotgun. So taking this into consideration, the list of weapons that are bad weapons under my definition is very short. Scout's primaries, in particular, are all decent at the very least. The majority of us agree that none of them are better than stock, but if you're a casual like me, better is irrelevant. And yet, a lot of people who play the game casually like to toss this list of primaries to the dirt and just stick with the generic scattergun. A couple are regarded to be okay in the right hands, one is considered painfully average, and one has infamy with trolls. But there is one primary for Scout that most people seem to consider flat out useless. If you ask me, the negative opinions people have for it come from a misunderstanding. Wait, hold on, before I get too deep into this, I should probably throw up that disclaimer. Warning, this video is a subjective opinion and is not to be taken as advice. If you are sensitive to disagreement or in any way allergic to opinions that do not line up with your own, it is suggested you change programs. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's talk about the Babyface's Blaster, what I consider to be one of TF2's most underrated weapons. The stats for this weapon are very straightforward on paper. You gain boost as you build damage and lose boost as you take damage or double jump. Combine that with a 10% slower default speed and a 34% reduced... Hang on, let me fix this. 34% reduced magazine size. I refuse to use the improper term. As far as stat lists go, this one is pretty vague and doesn't give very many concrete numbers. So let me be more specific. The Scout, by default, moves at 133% speed. To put that into perspective, the second fastest classes are the Medic and the Spy, both with 107%. With the Babyface's Blaster equipped, your default speed is reduced to 120, and with maximum boost, you're increased to 173. The boost meter takes 100 damage to charge from 0 to full, with one exception, and takes 25 damage to deplete from 100 to 0. To top it all off, a double jump will take away 75% of your boost meter. Now, I'm aware bringing the actual numbers up probably makes it obvious what the most common complaint to hear about the Babyface is. You look at the list of statistics and are probably tunnel visioning on that 25 damage. It's constantly brought up that it just takes a stiff breeze to knock you from 173% speed back down to 120%. That in itself sounds really bad, and yes, it can be annoying. especially if you're fighting a pyro. Even if you win the matchup, his afterburn will almost definitely take you down to your slowest speed. However, I think that a combination of shattered expectations and frustration makes people blind to the other stats. It seems to me that people who are inexperienced with a weapon, when they lose their boost, will drop to their knees and cry out to the gods asking why. But look at the speed again, 120%. And that comparison I made before to Medic and Spy, who have a maximum of 107%, you're still faster than 8 out of the 9 classes. The only class that passes you now is a scout who has no movement penalties, by a very small margin. In short, you are still fast. Something else people fail to consider, look back at the stats again. What don't you see? That's right, there's no damage reduction. The damage, spread, and fire rate are identical to stock, and we all know stock to have very potent damage capabilities. So long as you can aim, you will deal damage. And remember, boost is built by dealing damage. So if you are at 0 boost when you engage with someone, you will not stay there as long as you can effectively return fire. Not to mention, because of the scaling, it takes very little boost to match a default scout anyways. 50% boost brings you up to 147%. All of that is to say, you are certainly not a free kill when you're out of boost. That in itself establishes that boost, to a certain point, is expendable and is okay to lose. Which in turn means losing boost on double jumps is not nearly as much of a loss as people make it out to be. Now yes, it is true that you can't double jump like a normal scout, you have to be very picky about when you use it. While a normal scout can just mash the spacebar constantly and is basically allergic to the dirt under his feet, you have to time your second jump only when necessary, specifically when in combat. Ideally, you refrain from double jumping if at all possible.
Okay.
Fighting classes that you're already strong against, like spies, snipers, and engineers away from their toys, means your extremely high movement speed and single jumps are usually adequate for the job. The same story goes for classes like pyro or medic, since double jumping doesn't really change how well a pyro can hit you. Where your double jumps are needed is when fighting the power classes, soldiers especially. Unless the soldier is using a direct hit, they're almost certainly going to rely on splash damage at their feet to knock you down to low boost, so you will need to stay off the floor. In this instance, the timing of your jump will make a difference. If you jump just before you land a clean meat shot, you will regain most of the boost you lost in the jump. Yeah, you could double jump, look at that! Maintaining your speed during the fight and also giving you the advantage of staying away from his splash damage. Splash. I'm gonna leave that in. Now the other use of the coveted double jump is saving yourself from fall damage. There's a lot of pathways and escape routes that scouts will take regularly, using their double jump to keep their ankles intact. Meanwhile, you have to be more sparing. I play a lot of scout, and there are several places where I would normally just jump again to save my life, but also where there are pathways to land normally and not take damage. You use your speed to cross gaps horizontally and use the Source Engine's most universally good tool, air strafing. Air strafing is just good to know in general for all classes, but normally on scout you don't see it used because, well, spacebar is easier. But now that double jumps are not so expendable anymore, it comes in handy when you need it. But let's not forget, we did establish that losing your boost doesn't make you free strange food, so it's not the end of the world if you run out. Of all the negative stats that the BFB has, the one I dislike the most is the magazine size penalty. You're fast and you can use that insane speed to play aggressively, but 4 shot shells instead of 6 neuters the ability to be aggressive. Certainly not a deal breaker, but it is my biggest gripe. Now that the stats are behind us, what's the upside? Yeah, there's not a lot to talk about on what the upside is. The reason you'd use this thing is for that outstanding top speed. Okay, I'll stop now. I'm pushing copyright as it is. Gameplay wise, aside from your dodging technique, it's really just a side grade. You run fast, hit hard, and oftentimes die even harder. Not unlike a scout normally plays. I'm just being a nuisance here. Although there is one small niche, which is oddly specific, but to some people like me, it is one good reason to use this weapon. Demo Knights are cockroaches, specifically ones with 4 heads. An Eyelander demo with all heads and boots moves at 136% speed, which you might remember it's even faster than a traditional scout. Pair that speed with high resistances, shield charge, and on-demand critical hits, Demo Knights are really hard to finish off. You play Engineer to hard counter him, he'll simply avoid you and keep collecting his easy godlike off of your other teammates. Now because none of his shields have bullet resistance, and there's only one class who moves faster than a 4-head Demo Knight on the ground, You see where I'm going with this? Yes, it's very satisfying to make a Demo Knight panic because he can no longer run away like he normally does. Just be sure not to give him a free hit because when you take 65 damage, you're no longer his worst nightmare. Now's the time I'll briefly speak on the weapons that are good sidekicks for your new best friend. The pistols are all easy winners. Since in my experience the biggest drawback is the smaller magazine size, a solid sidearm is always a good idea. My personal preference is the pocket pistol because of the fire rate, and it's also an item set thing. Stock pistol is good too. The Winger is a bit different. Not so hot as a backup gun, but the big jump does help with your limits in double jumps. The most common secondary to see paired with a babyface blaster is also a good choice, the Flying Guillotine. It deals 50 damage on impact and 40 with bleed at all ranges. But this is the one weird exception I mentioned before. You see, the meter is charged by up to 100 damage. If you can do quick math in your head, you've probably figured out that the combined damage of the guillotine is 90. Yet, for some reason, if you hit somebody and do the full 40 bleed damage, you get 100% boost with 90 damage. Why? I couldn't tell you, but features are features. The best thing about the guillotine is it lets you build boost without being in direct line of fire. But it does fail to be a good backup since it's very risk-reward. If you miss, it doesn't cover your weaknesses very well. I do use it from time to time because it is very fun. Oh! That was probably the best cleaver I've ever gotten. But in general, what you want is a damage dealing secondary, both to cover your limited capacity and also to keep your speed up. Now for the melee weapons, they're less important. The obvious choice for a lot of people is the Rap Assassin. Range damage certainly helps. In my opinion, the amount it provides is negligible, but that's more of a preference thing. Most people will be fine with it. Another situationally good option is the Candy Cane. In the event you fight a pyro and win, but you're still burning, the health kit dropped will allow you to maintain some boost. But I say situational because soldiers and demos become all the more pain to deal with. It just depends on your situation. Now, if you've been curious as to why I use neither of these, it's just because I'm a total dork and I think the Sandman is funny. The upside does basically nothing, but the downside of minus 15 health also does basically nothing, so what you get is pretty much a stock bat with ball jokes. And to me, that's way funnier than the Holy Mackerel or any other stock reskin. So what's the takeaway? Well, more than anything, don't just take people's word on what's good and bad. For a year or more, I went on what other people said, which was to the effect of, don't bother, it's terrible. Then I went to try it myself. Holy wow, this thing is so much fun to use. And it's really not that bad. I can only assume that this perspective of hating anything that isn't stock comes from people who don't want to change the playstyle to fit the weapon. Which, sure, I do that on some classes. Sometimes you just want the simplicity of stock so you can enjoy the core function of who you're playing. But I am a scout main, and I love using the side grades and using them well. No, I'm not pretending to be the greatest player that ever was, but I certainly know my way around the scatterguns. One of my greatest kill streaks to date was with the Babyface's blaster. For a while, it was my absolute best, with a total of 30. I don't have any clips of it unfortunately, but I do have a screenshot. I can use it effectively. With a bit of practice, so can anybody. And that to me proves that it's not a bad weapon. If you prefer to stick to stock, go ahead, it's a free world. As for me, I'll continue to create sonic booms on the ground as I beef and miss the medic pick.
I saw a medic go that way. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. I'm pathetic.